No escaping the rain today, it seems. Alright, what did I read today? I read some stuff that made me actually kind of think about things like tech and just the future in general, and how whether or not people will accept it, and are things such as certain regulations and stuff simply outdated and it's not factoring in what people are actually using nowadays. The first one was kind of interesting because it dealt with things like drone delivery, and one of the topic is, are people going to get used to this stuff, or are they still going to be afraid of drones in the air? Because this is kind of funny still, where people say someone flying it recreationally, for example, just capturing a picture or video is so dangerous, yet all of a sudden this is okay. So in this case, it dealt with just a video game, and apparently in this game, it's called Rust, they're going to introduce things like drone delivery. So you can see in the post person made, this one says drone delivery currently planned for February 4th patch. So in this game here, you can essentially use these drones to go to these terminals, I guess you could say, to get things like items and stuff like that. And sure enough, it's basically flying drones. A lot of people think it's cool and all that. It makes you wonder if it's going to be that simplistic. But what it made me think of is, again, how I mentioned, if you want people to get things used to stuff like this, it always comes down to things, for example, like pop culture, arts, and entertainment. So this would be a telltale sign where people are growing up or consuming media where they constantly interact and see stuff like this, then more than likely they're gonna get used to it. I know in general, just in terms of things like drones, usually when I talk to people that are more tech oriented or say gamers, they're usually more open-minded, and when people try to tell them, oh, this stuff is so dangerous, they even actually give people like the eyebrow, like, what are you talking about? The person's just flying it like so low and so forth, even if they don't use a drone itself. So I guess there's a sign that people will eventually get used to this stuff. And I guess the big question is whether or not is a regular average individual going to be able to use stuff like this, or will everything just be taken up commercially, so to speak? So with that thought of being able to use things like modern day tech in various places, it actually made me think of this topic with this article I read, because usually with things like national parks, and let's just say you're trying to fly a drone, it's so restrictive, and they're like, oh, you have to go through this extreme procedure and all that, where people say in many cases they don't get permission for it. You'd have to be like a big, huge business or organization. So how about this one? Just think about this in context. This one says, National Park Service can't require permits and fees for commercial filming. Judge rules. Essentially, it seems like there was a filmmaker of sort who was creating a documentary in a national park, and in doing so, for some reason, they started to hammer down on him, like after the fact that he did it already. And with this fine or whatever he got, he basically fought it and won. So it's kind of interesting. This one says, a DC federal judge found it's an unconstitutional content-based restriction on free speech to make filmmakers pay to shoot in national parks just because their work is commercial. In a huge win for filmmakers, a DC federal judge has ruled that it's unconstitutional for the National Park Services to require permits or charge fees for commercial filming on its land. Indie director Gordon Price in December 2019 sued the U.S. Attorney General, then William Barr, along with the officials from the Department of the Interior and National Park Service, challenging the constitutionality of the rule. In late 2018, two NPS officers issued Price a citation. Price was shooting Crawford Road, a feature about an area in York County that is notorious for unsolved murders and is rumored to be haunted. He argued that what happened to him amounted to content-based prior restraints on free speech. The statute at issue didn't require a permit for non-commercial filmmaking, and there was a specific exemption for news gathering. Violations could result in fines or up to 6 months in prison. Central to the dispute is whether the act of filming is protected speech or just finished work, and whether the commercial nature of the project could qualify as content-based restriction. Both parties moved for a judgment on the pleadings. On Friday, U.S. District Judge Colleen Collar-Cotley sided with Price. So that's kind of an interesting statement here. It says, Mr. Price's filmmaking at these parks constitutes a form of expressive speech protected by the First Amendment. She writes, in my opinion, adding the quote, creation of a film must also fall within the armpit of the First Amendment's protection of freedom of expression. To find otherwise would artificially disconnect an integral piece of expressive process of filmmaking. And this is actually true, which I actually say to people all the time, which they don't know the difference. Like in terms of filming, it depends again what you're doing, because a news crew, for example, could go into various places and just tape stuff, even with their huge cameras and all that. That's completely different in terms of a big budget movie. This one says, if Price's film was non-commercial or featured only newsworthy information about current events, the permitting requirements wouldn't have applied. So Collar-Cotley found that amounts to a content-based restriction on his First Amendment rights. While one of the goals of the statute, protecting natural resources, is a noble cause, Caller Cotley finds no reason the threat posed by a man with a tripod making a commercial film is any different than the same person and equipment that's used for a non-commercial project. She also notes that in decades since the statute passed, technology has come a long way and, quote, any individual may easily enter a national park and shoot a high-quality video at will using nothing more than a smartphone. Caller Cotley issued a declaration that the National Park Service's requirements that those engaged in commercial filming must obtain permits and pay fees are unconstitutional under the First Amendment, and she issued a permanent injunction enjoining the permit and fee requirements for commercial filming and the prosecution and imposition of criminal liability thereunder. In issuing this injunction, the court observes that a more targeted permitting regime for commercial filming, which is more closely connected to the threat posed by large groups and heavy filming equipment, may pass constitutional muster in the future. So if I'm getting this correctly, she's basically saying, which I agree actually, there has to be a clear distinct difference between someone, for example, walking with their smartphone and taping it versus a film crew of 100 people taking up all this space with heavy equipment. There's a huge difference in that case, which would make sense in my opinion, in terms of requiring things like permits and all that. It's such a fascinating thing to think about because even here in Canada, when you think of things like drones, I remember Transport Canada, I think they still actually have this ridiculous mindset where if someone's taking your drone, filming an area, and they show it to their friends just to show them what it's like, they say that is, quote, commercial because you are educating people about the area. To that you have to say, what? That makes no sense. It makes me wonder, if you challenged all this stuff, like say legally, like what these people did in the US, would that be the same thing? Because I actually remember one thing, like I wouldn't know what the result would be is, they tried to claim anything you do with a drone, doesn't matter. If you make 1 penny, for example, it's commercial. And one person was arguing, yeah, let's see if this will hold up with Canada revenue, where someone makes 1 cent and now they can write off their whatever, like $1,000 drones at business. Because even in general for anything else, just because you sell like something $1 on eBay once the whole year just to get rid of it, that doesn't make you a business afterwards. So it makes you wonder in many cases, like here, are a lot of people outdated when it comes to using things like tech? It makes you think where in many cases there's so many laws and regulations where they are there, but they're not actually, I guess, legal, if that's what you want to say, versus what your rights should be. And a lot of people, they just don't actually challenge it. Instead, they just sit there, and I guess in this case, if you want to say it, would be like saying policing other people, saying, hey, this is what is written and so forth, as opposed to them actually trying to help, saying, well, it makes no sense, we should try to help fix this in some way. That's why I think even for things like drone use and all that, and things like, say, a regulation here in Canada, for those people who just say, oh, whatever, just spend this amount of money, buy this course or whatever, I don't think that's helping personally overall. Because you're kind of encouraging them to say, oh yeah, it makes sense to fear this stuff like crazy and all that, where it doesn't. If you don't start bringing light to it, I mean, when will it end? I mean, imagine this situation. You could technically actually argue, oh, because of the way it's written, someone going out with a smartphone, filming it, and publishing it here or there for people to see, that's commercial. Because like here in Canada, I know Transport Canada's definition is because that could lead to direct or indirect benefit. I mean, to me, that's ridiculous, and people should be bringing lights to how crazy it is. Alright, looks like there's no flying today. I guess it's time for the archive. Alright, see you guys later.